The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. Jesus addressed this parable to those who were convinced of their own righteousness and despised everyone else. Two people went up to the temple area to pray. One was a Pharisee, and the other was a tax collector. The Pharisee took up his position and spoke this prayer to himself. "O God, I thank you that I am not like the rest of humanity, greedy, dishonest, adulterous, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week, and I pay tithes on my whole income." But the tax collector stood off at a distance and would not even raise his eyes to heaven, but beat his breast and prayed, "O God, be merciful to me, a sinner." I tell you, the latter went home justified, not the former. For whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and the one who humbles himself will be exalted. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord.
I just had a thought that's completely irrelevant, but I remember my little brother, I'm the oldest of 9 kids, and my little brother Nick, I remember one time when he was playing Mass or something at home when he was a little kid, and we were sitting there and he was doing our priest, Father Don Dilg, and Nick is just a really good mimic, and he was doing the different things that Father cleared his throat, at the end of his song he glanced at his watch. And we thought it was so funny because he had it all down, and I was thinking, well, if someone was doing that for me, click on the microphone, go like this, because I'm turning it off so I could turn this on. I don't know. Anyway, I was just thinking what the imitation would be if my little brother Nick were doing it. It'd be okay, see, it's totally irrelevant, but there you go. Today we have the parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector. Jesus explains it at the beginning. He says, he addressed this parable to those who were convinced of their own righteousness and despised everyone else. So you have the Pharisee comes in and he says to himself, right? He prays to himself, which is worth noting. Who are you supposed to pray to? God, right? And he prays to himself. He said this prayer to himself. I thank you I'm not like the rest of humanity. They're greedy, dishonest, adulterous. Thanks to you that I'm not like this tax collector. And the tax collector comes in and he beats his breast, like we do at Mass, right? Where we say, through my fault, through my fault, through my most grievous fault. Notice we don't hit the person next to us, right? Say through their fault, through their fault, through their most grievous fault. We take responsibility, we say here, and we're imitating the tax collector, who won't even lift his eyes to heaven, but rather in humility lowers himself and says, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. He went home justified, the Pharisee did not, because whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and the one who humbles himself will be exalted. Now, this is not just a moral exhortation, although it obviously is that too. We are called, right, to not be like the Pharisee, and instead to be like the tax collector. And so we need to examine ourselves and say, where am I on that spectrum between the two, Where might I make myself like the Pharisee and live there in self-righteousness? It's good for us to examine ourselves. But it's not just a moral exhortation. It's also theological. It also is a reference to Christ. Because what does St. Paul in Philippians say that Christ did? Well, he who is God did not consider being in the form of God something to be grasped, but rather he emptied himself, taking the form of a slave, and humbled himself even to death on a cross. So he who was most exalted humbled himself. He took the path of descent. He came down and joined us in our lowliness. Joined us, made himself like us in all things but sin. So that when we're given this exhortation to humble ourselves that we might be exalted, what we're really being told by Jesus is follow me. do what I have done. As I have taken the lowest place, and then I will be lifted up in the resurrection and the ascension, so you also take the lowest place. The path of following Christ is not the path of lifting ourselves up. The path of following Christ is following him in his descent into humility, and following him in his humble descent to be with those who are poor. We who are poor, to meet us in our poverty. You and I are called to do the same thing if we're going to be following Christ. If we're not doing that, then we're not followers of him, because that's the direction of his life. In De Lexite, which is this apostolic exhortation that Pope Leo just published, maybe some of you have read it, Pope Leo finished something that was begun by Pope Francis. And he has this is paragraph 16, part of paragraph 16. Listen to this. He says, God is merciful love, and his plan of love, which unfolds and is fulfilled in history, is above all his descent and coming among us to free us from slavery, fear, sin, and the power of death. Addressing their human condition with a merciful gaze and a heart full of love, he turned to his creatures, you, me, and thus took care of their poverty. Precisely in order to share the limitations and fragility of our human nature, he himself became poor and was born in the flesh like us. We came to know him in the smallness of a child laid in a manger, and in the extreme humiliation of the cross, where he shared our radical poverty, which is death. It is easy to understand then why we can also speak theologically of a preferential option on the part of God for the poor. Okay, notice how Pope Leo talks about the descent, all right? I should say this isn't just me, okay? It's not just Jesus. Okay, Jesus, it seems to me, is actually the one who's saying it. Pope Leo is just picking up on that, all right? And I'm trying to too. But the preferential option for the poor, that's become a phrase, a relatively recent phrase, in Catholic social teaching. Catholic social teaching is the body of Catholic teaching, especially, this goes all the way back to the very beginning, but it's especially from Leo the 13th in his encyclical 1891 forward that we think of modern Catholic social teaching. Many principles, solidarity, subsidiarity, and then that's the preferential option. That God, although he loves all of humanity, has a particular kind of preference for the poor that we see in the way that Jesus lives the gospel. Because who does he hang out with? Mostly tax collectors and prostitutes, fishermen, not the rich and the wealthy, but primarily the poor. Now Pope Leo goes on to say this not because God doesn't love you, doesn't fail to love you, okay, if you're rich, but because the poor are in special need of his care, one, and then two, I would say, because there tends to be, not always by any means, but often there's a kind of openness when we recognize our poverty to Christ, to God, to our need for him, that sometimes we forget when we feel like we have everything we need, when we're all self-sufficient, so that he can meet the hearts of the poor more easily than he can the rich. And he has a particular care for them because they're in need to be brought justice, which often is denied them by the rich and the powerful of the world. So if God has a preferential option for the poor, if that's who he hangs out with, then we should have a preferential option for the poor if we're going to imitate Christ in his descent, in his movement to be with the poor. The Lord hears the cry of the poor, we heard in the psalm. Well, so must we if we're going to be followers of Christ. The Lord is not deaf to the wail of the orphan, nor to the widow when she pours out her complaint. The one who serves God willingly is heard. The prayer of the lowly pierces the clouds. It does not rest till it reaches its goal. nor will it withdraw till the Most High responds, judges justly and affirms the right, and the Lord will not delay. If the Lord hears the cry of the poor, then so also must we. Now, there's many kinds of poverty. Recently I was preaching on other ones. Well, the one I want to talk about today, especially in this Respect Life Month, is the poverty of the child in the womb. The one who is the smallest and therefore whose voice isn't heard by us, but is heard by God. The child in the womb whose life isn't protected by law in many states now. It's changed a little bit, but still for the most part not protected. Certainly here in Colorado, not protected at all. And that's a great poverty, because my life's protected, and so is yours, but theirs is not. And that's not fair. That's an inequity. That's a poverty to be overlooked by the law. It's an injustice. And you and I are called by Christ to hear the cry of all of the poor, including the preborn child in the womb, including also their mother who also often is in poverty, often doesn't see any way out other than abortion, doesn't see what she can do. Francesca Matthews Green has a phrase I thought was really powerful. She says, nobody chooses abortion like they choose an ice cream cone. A woman chooses abortion like an animal chooses to gnaw off their own leg when they're caught in a trap. And so we, if we're going to be attentive to the poor child in the womb, to the mother who's in need, have to say, well, one, we got to work for law to protect the life of the unborn child. That's certainly true. And to help the mother. I think both of those things are essential. Law builds culture. They have a reciprocal relationship. Law changes the way people think about things. I remember one of my brothers, his college roommate, his argument for why abortion was morally right was because it was legal. And he said, well, if it's legal, therefore it must be okay. And the funny thing is, what's legal really influences us. If we want to impact culture, part of that, an essential part of that, is law. But the deeper thing, because law is not enough, has to be that we live our lives in radical solidarity, which means connection with those, especially those who suffer, especially those in poverty. That we live our lives in radical poverty with the poor, including the unborn child threatened by abortion, including the mother who doesn't know what else to do. So that we say, you don't carry this burden alone, but we're going to carry it with you. You're not in this by yourself. You're in it with us, because we're with you. And I think in the church, there's a lot of things that we do, Catholic Charities in Colorado Springs. Here, our wonderful pregnancy center does a lot to help women, to help children. What are you called to do? What am I called to do? Where are we called to more fully encounter the need of the mother in need and her child in need, to where we give ourselves in service to the both of them, in practical service? It might save the life of that child, save the heart of that mother. This is something that is essential to our lives as Christians. So my encouragement would be to pray about that. To say, Lord, where are you calling me to serve? How are you calling me to help the pregnancy center here in town? Or to help this girl that I know who's in a difficult situation? Or, well, whatever it may be. But we're called to give ourselves radically, because that's what Christ does. We're called to lower ourselves and take the lowest place instead of kind of ignoring the needs of those who are poor. And whoever that is, we've got to look outside of ourselves and say, Lord, this is someone you love. Let me love them too. Let me pour myself out. Let's pray the Lord that he would give to us that grace, that we might become defenders of every human life, including the life in the womb, and that we might become practical supporters of all those who live in poverty, especially those mothers who now are suffering and who are in need of our help.